So I'm sorry I missed you guys Thursday, and I had to cancel class, but I'm going to explain why during our presentation today. So today we're going to be talking about crash test dummies.
Meg,
Yes.
today I got a book about climate change.
Oh, cool. I'm glad you guys are learning more about it. That's really great.
Yeah.
Okay, so today we're going to do our normal introduction. We're going to talk about crash testing and then crash test dummies, and then we'll go through our activities and resources. So as an introduction, you guys know me. I'm Megan. I'm Aiden and Lizzie's mom, and I still am working at scientist.com. And I have a background in science, and I love teaching you guys cool facts. But we're chatting today because it's summer, so you guys are out of school, but your moms and dads are still working, and it's still fun to learn new things. But what prompted this topic today, or what made me think to teach you guys about this, is something that happened to me last week and is why I couldn't teach class on Thursday. Are you ready to see why? I rear-ended a truck in my car, and I'm totally okay. I wasn't hurt at all. It looks really, really bad, though, doesn't it? It does.
Yeah, what happened? What happened to it?
Yeah. So I hit the rear of a really big, like, commercial truck that had a metal ladder coming down on it for people to climb up. And that metal ladder dug into the hood of my car here. And so when I went to reverse the car to pull it out from under the truck, it almost ripped the hood off. So even though, what I thought was really cool is that even though this crash looks really bad, I wasn't hurt at all. My airbags didn't even go off. And that's because cars have really, really advanced safety features that we don't think about, and that I don't even think about when I get in my car. So I wanted to learn more about what kinds of things keep us safe when we're in vehicles, and how we know that those keep us safe, besides getting in crashes ourselves, right? Because we don't want to be the testers. So that's why we have crash test dummies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how this works. So crash testing itself is a form of testing that's destructive. And that means that it destroys the thing it's testing. So you can't crash test a car and go ahead and drive it away. And there are tests you can do on things that don't destroy the thing you're testing, but this completely ruins cars when they do this. So it's kind of expensive to do, but it's really important because it determines something that they call crash worthiness, which is how well the car holds up in an accident. And another thing it tests is crash compatibility. And I couldn't figure out what this was for the longest time, but what it means is how cars interact when they crash into each other. So for instance, how little cars like mine interact when they crash into a giant truck like the one I hit. And so these kinds of things are important because when cars weigh different amounts or they're different sizes, they interact or kind of treat each other differently in accidents. So the truck I hit, you can't even tell basically that I hit the truck. Like nothing happened to it. There was a metal thing in the back that kind of held the license plate and it was bent a tiny bit. Meanwhile, my car, the front end was like destroyed, right? So that means that they're not compatible in a crash because they have way different levels of damage. And we do this crash testing for a lot of different reasons, but one is to minimize loss. And minimize means to make smaller. So we want to reduce or make smaller the number of injuries from crashes, the number of fatalities, which is unfortunate, but it happens, right? So fatalities means that someone dies as a result of a crash, and we want to minimize that number down to 0 if we can, using safety features. And then also property damage. So does anybody want to take a guess at how much it's going to cost to fix my car? Brandon, I bet you know.
Over $1,000.
Definitely over $1,000.
$3,000.
$3,000.
Quite a lot of money.
Lots of money. So I think it came out to $7,283.10.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Why
so
10 cents?
I have no idea. I thought that was very strange. I think they said they're charging me for some stickers. There's like safety stickers that go inside certain parts of your car to label them, and I have to pay for those stickers. So like one of the stickers was $2.44 or something like that, because I got an itemized list. So basically that kind of damage is property damage because the car is my property. And I'm very lucky that I have had good insurance. And so I only have to pay $500 out of pocket. It's called a deductible. So basically, no matter how much I smashed up my car, the most I would have to pay is $500. So I'm really lucky in that sense. But that doesn't mean that that money doesn't go somewhere or exist, right? The insurance company has to pay for that, and it costs money for the body shop. So it does cost money in the grand scheme of things when these accidents happen. And so we want to reduce the cost of those accidents as well, and reduce the cost of property damage. So we also crash test because we want to make sure that standards are being followed. So there are rules that car makers have about how they make their cars. And there's government organizations that test the cars in crashes to make sure that they're following those rules. And they also provide this information or give this information to vehicle owners so that you know that you're driving a safe car. And then also, the final one is that we encourage improvements, which means because we're doing this crash testing and vehicle manufacturers or the people that are making the cars want to have good ratings, they're going to do more and more cool stuff to try to make their cars safer and safer and safer. And when you get in a very new car versus a very, very old car, there's a lot of differences in safety technologies that have been developed, and that the part of those is to improve the crash test ratings. So how long do you guys think we've been crash testing for? Does anyone want to take a guess at this?
As long as cars were invented. 1928.
That's a very good guess. So I read today that the first fatal car accident, in which someone was killed, which is really unfortunate, happened in like 1869. So cars have been around for like a long time, and they were kind of prototypes before. Remember, they weren't widely manufactured, so not everyone had them for a very long time. But when cars first started being on the road, there weren't rules to go along with it. So there were still horses and carriages all over the place, and there weren't like stoplights and things. And horse and carriages and buggies even got into accidents, right? So we started crash testing kind of late for when cars came around, and I'm going to give you a hint with this picture. So this is an early rollover test. So we started crash testing in 1934. So it's not even 100 years ago, and cars have been on the road for a lot longer. But if you think about it, we've made a lot of advancements in safety in that short amount of time, right? So there's a couple different kinds of crash tests that are done. And the first one is a frontal crash test. So if you look at this, this is what you usually think about in a car accident. And this is the kind of accident that I was in, right? It was in the front of my car. So vehicles or cars usually hit something that's solid or like concrete in the test. And so here you can see there's special tape on the car to show where the center line is. And then this thing that it's hitting is just on the front driver's side in the US. In the EU, it might be on the front passenger side in some places, but there's different kinds of overlap. So how far the barrier that it's hitting and the car overlap. So they can be overlapped all the way, like when I hit the car in front of me, or they can just be kind of on the corners or on the edges. So this picture is a moderate overlap, meaning that there's a smaller portion of the car or a smaller space on the car that's in charge of absorbing all the force from the accident. So cars can't just be built to handle one type of car accident, right? Or one direction, because accidents happen in all different ways. And if you think about this, like, yes, two cars could hit front to front, but they're also likely to hit front to back or front to side. And so we do a lot of different types of these testing. And there's also side impact testing. And this one is a very, very dangerous kind of accident. And so what they usually do with this one is you can see this van and they have this big red thing, and the red thing is called a sled. And the sled is a 3,000 pound, basically a machine with a bumper on it. And they run it at 35 miles an hour into the side of the car. And it simulates or kind of mimics what would happen if a car ran a red light and ran into the side of another one. And so once they do this, they can see something called the crumple zone, which is the part of the car that is made to like absorb all that force. And then they can see what kind of injuries would happen to people inside the car. And then the first picture I showed you with that old-timey car that was kind of tipped over, that was a very early rollover test. So they also test cars' ability to kind of support themselves when they have to be rolled over. So there are things in the car, there are pillars that hold up the roof, and those are kind of in the door frame where the windows aren't, basically. So if you look around the windows, there's pillars, and Aiden and Lizzie's dad is a firefighter, and they have different names for those pillars. Like there's an A pillar and a B pillar and things like that. And those are what you need to cut to remove the roof of the car in case of an accident where you can't open the doors. But these kinds of tests see how well the roof and the pillars hold up to being rolled over in the accident. And a lot of companies or a lot of organizations do this kind of testing because it can be a very serious type of accident as well. And then there's also rear impact testing. So this is what happened to the truck that I hit. And the truck I hit was not a truck like this. It was a huge commercial truck. It kind of looked like a garbage truck almost. Olivia, did you have a question?
Sometimes if I go over to my friend's house after school, we ride the bus together, and there is a door on the roof.
Oh, yeah. So
in case it rolls over, you can go out that.
Yes, exactly. So I remember doing the safety things on the school bus when I was a kid as well. And buses have different standards than passenger cars. So that's a really good point, Olivia, and one I forgot to mention. Things like buses and trains and big vans and things have different standards than our passenger cars, but I chose to kind of focus on passenger cars in this one. So thank you for bringing that up. So this is an example of a rear impact crash, or meaning this truck got hit from the backside. And this is also important because even though a lot of this damage isn't to the part where the people are sitting in the vehicle, there's force that happens during an accident. So when you hit the car, the people in the car are going to move as well. So you need to test and make sure that they're still safe in the front. And the other thing we're testing with these crashes is the technologies that are in the car that help keep us safe. So these probably look pretty familiar to you guys, right? There's a seatbelt. We all have to wear our seatbelts in the car for safety or be buckled into our car seat. There's airbags right here that inflate to help keep your body from stopping too quick when hitting things. Luckily in my accident that I just had, the airbags didn't even go off because I was going so slow. There's also anti-lock brakes that keep you from skidding out. There are padded dashboards. So in old timey cars, a lot of times the dashboards were like made of wood or metal. And so you can imagine in a car accident, if you stop too quickly and you hit something wood or metal, that's pretty bad for your noggin, right? But if it's padded, it's a lot more safe. And there's also really new technologies that are in a lot of cars. Brandon and Olivia, I bet the Tesla has these. So adaptive headlights that change, how bright
it has like a tiny screen that shows you all the cars around you.
Yeah, so those are
and if there's any tiny things like a fire hydrant, it shows you as a cone.
Super cool.
And if you get too close, it starts beeping at you.
Yeah, so that's a collision sensor.
So you know how to stop.
Yeah, and there's also lane departure sensors. So if you start to swerve out of your lane for some reason, the car will usually warn you. And some cars like Teslas will even help stop your car in the event that it senses an accident is coming, because the car can react, the computers in the car can react faster than we can with our eyes and our brains. So
there are little cameras all around.
Yep. So there's a lot of super cool new stuff in new cars that is keeping us very safe. But the reason that we have these technologies and we're actually crashing these cars is so that we can collect important data. So that data about, say here, how fast you accelerate. So acceleration is motion and how quickly you kind of start moving. And that can have a big impact on our bodies, right? So if you have a slow crash like I did, nothing really happened to me. But if that crash had been going faster, my body would have accelerated a lot more and I could have been hurt. So we're doing things like that to see how much energy gets kind of pushed into the car and how much the car absorbs. And there's a whole bunch of data that goes along with this. Because if you think about it, if you have a brand new car and you're crashing it and it's destructive, so you ruin that car, that's an expensive test, right? So not only have you ruined this very expensive vehicle, but then you also are paying for all the equipment, you're paying for the building, you're paying for all the people and the scientists that are doing all the work. So crash testing is expensive, but it is super important. And once they take all this data and look through it and do some determinations, they can come out with a rating. So ratings usually come in 5 stars for different cars, and they're put out by a government body. So in the US, it's the Department of Transportation. And they basically tell people that are shopping for cars or own cars about how safe the vehicle is. They tell you about the structure of the vehicle or the safety cage and how well that works. They measure injury potential and how much the dummies that we're going to talk about move in the car. And they use all that to condense it down. It would be really hard for us to review tons of data on each type of car we are interested, right? Like we'd all have to be data scientists, and that'd be really difficult. So they take it and they condense it down into just 5 stars that we can take a look at. So crash test dummies are really important to this process. And we use them for a very good reason. Does anybody know why we use dummies?
So actual people don't get hurt.
That's a good one.
And so you can still see the impact on the person without somebody actually getting hurt.
Yeah, Rhea,
If someone actually got hurt, that would be really bad.
Yeah. Rhea, did you want to tell us something?
It would not be the point of a crash test dummy.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, basically the dummy's job is to pretend to be a person in the accident, right? Because none of us want to volunteer to get in a car crash to see if a car is safe. And there's not really anything else we can use. It's not very ethical to use animals, and we don't want to use cadavers or human bodies. Some of those technologies, that is what we used to have to do. But now we have these super cool, super technologically advanced crash test dummies. And so they also do things that human occupants couldn't. So even if I volunteered to get in this car accident, it'd be really difficult for scientists to measure things like the force on my femur, on my leg bones, or how fast my head was moving, right? So crash test dummies are made to be just like humans, but with extra data collection capabilities. So they come in a ton of different sizes, just like real people. And there are standards for what is used in crash tests. Like I think they usually use a man that's like 170 pounds or something. And then there's like a tiny woman dummy that doesn't really make sense. And people are lobbying to change that. But you can see there's also child crash test dummies. And there's like a little toddler dummy. And then there's a little baby crash test dummy in a car seat. So they can also use this to test child restraint systems and the latch system that we use to buckle down car seats into cars. So really old cars, you just put the car seat in and basically buckle the car seat in using the seat belt. The latch system is like an anchor point system that all new cars have. It's pretty hard to find a car old enough now that it doesn't have a latch system in it. And it's a really good way to anchor down children's seats. So there's a lot of different dummy sizes and reasons that we use the testing. And the dummies are actually made from materials that are supposed to be similar to the human body, not similar in like what they're made of, but similar in the way they react to situations. So like the spine you can see here is a bunch of metal discs. And obviously our spines aren't made of metal discs, right? They're bone. But because of the way these are put together, they do kind of the same thing in an accident. And then there's rubber pads in between, just like our discs in our backs. And then you can see the outside of the dummy's like face and body and skin is meant to mimic human skin and muscle and things like that in layers. So the cool thing about this is that because of the way they're constructed, a whole bunch of instrumentation can fit inside. So instrumentation are things that are allowing us to measure data from these accidents, right? So they are just like some of the technology we have in our phone that tells the phone like when we're shaking it or when we're touching it or moving it. There's things like that that are inside this dummy and allow us to measure really important data in a whole bunch of different spots in the body. So one of the things that they measure is acceleration. So I talked about this a little bit before, but the crash test dummies have accelerometers that measure acceleration basically all over it. They're inside the head, they're in the chest, they're in the pelvis, they're in the legs and the feet, and they measure how fast the dummy starts moving in a certain direction. So you can see here there's an arrow. So the one in the head is measuring how fast the head moves from leaning against the headrest to maybe hitting the airbag here. And it's the rate, acceleration is the rate at which speed changes. So obviously faster acceleration means you start going quicker, faster, right? Or if you're going, this is low acceleration and then fast acceleration. And kind of without really thinking about it, we know which one is probably worse for the body, right? Going quickly is probably not so good. So like an example would be if you banged your head into the brick wall for some reason, the speed at which your head is moving also changes really quickly, right? Because the brick wall isn't going to give. It would be different if you hit your head into a pillow, right? Because your head is slowing down at a better rate and not just like bam, right? Not stopping so quickly. So that way we can kind of measure the amount of like force and acceleration on these different parts of the body, especially the head when you're moving in the car or maybe even hitting an airbag. Olivia.
It can be bad if your neck moves too fast because
Exactly.
it can just snap.
Yep, or you can get something called whiplash, where your neck and stuff gets really sore then because it's basically a strain injury. And I've had whiplash before from getting hit in the back during a soccer game, actually, and it's very uncomfortable. I can't imagine how awful it would be in a car crash. So that was one of the things that I was worried about in my accident. Luckily, I was going slow enough, so the acceleration wasn't as quick, and I didn't have to worry about that part.
What do you mean snaps off?
No, it's just like,
It can break, she means it can break the vertebra.
yeah, it goes like very fast. If it goes like that, then that can be bad.
Yeah. So another important thing that the dummies are measuring is load. And this is basically the amount of force that is put upon different parts of your body in the crash. So it's kind of like how much hits against it. And this is really important because we know through scientific and data measurement how much force or pressure it takes for different bones to break. So there's, here's a frontal load barrier, and this is a driver left female force. So they're measuring the force of the femur, or the biggest of your leg bones, so your thigh bones, in the passenger. And they're measuring the force at the accident. You can see it tops out down here. And what's happening is we know what measurement here it would take to break that bone. So we would know from this data if it crosses a certain line that it was likely to result in a fracture of the bone. And so because of this data that we have in the background, knowing what loads the bones break under, we can tell kind of what damage would happen to the body in the accident as well. And another type of sensor in here are movement sensors. So these are used usually in the dummy's chest, and they measure how much the chest kind of gets squished in the crash. Because we know that as we're breathing in and out, right, our sternum and our ribs and the cartilage in there and like allows our muscles, things to move. And so chests move in and out, and that's okay. But we want to know how much they're moving in the crash. So if you're in a crash of say 35 miles an hour and you lean forward in the accident and then maybe the airbag hits your chest, we want to measure how much it kind of pushes your chest in. Because obviously if it does it too much, if it's compressed maybe like 2 inches, it's going to hurt and be uncomfortable, but it's not going to injure you really. So if that starts to go a lot deeper, then we know that that could cause some really serious internal injuries, like hurting your organs or maybe breaking bones. So these sensors are really important as well. So the other thing we do, besides all these really fancy load sensors and accelerometers and really technological things, is people actually paint the dummies. So it sounds a little bit silly, right? But it works really well. So you can see here, this dummy has some blue paint and some yellow paint and some red paint on its head. There's some on the legs. And that means that after the crash, they can open up the doors and see where that paint transferred to. So if they use different colors for everything, they can tell where the body hit during the crash. So, obviously it's okay probably to paint the legs and the back of the head a different color because those aren't going to hit the same places. But then they can see, like, here's where the face hit on the airbag. And if this car got hit from the side, we might be able to see paint on the door. You can see paint from the legs and the knees here in the dashboard. So one of the things that does is it allows us to see where our bodies are touching during the accident and where we need to reduce the amount of force caused by the accident. So the whole goal of this is to limit something called kinetic energy. kinetic energy comes from being in motion. So my car did this super well the other day, right? So obviously, ideally, we wouldn't crash cars ever, but because we do, we want the best possible chances of not only surviving the crash, but not being injured at all. So what we want to do is limit the amount of energy from our bodies being in motion. And we can't really help that our bodies are in motion, right? Because the car is already in motion and we're suddenly stopping that motion. So what we want is for the car around us to absorb most of that. And we want to remove that or absorb that energy slowly and evenly, because we don't want to absorb it all in one place, because that's how we would get hurt, right? If we were the ones to absorb all of it instead of the plastic and the metal and all the things in our car. So in an ideal world, your car has seat belts that help slow you down in the crash. And then at the point where your seatbelt is slowing you down and you might start to get hurt in your chest, that's when the airbag would deploy. And so then that starts to slow you down. And so there's a whole kind of cascade of activities that happen in your car in a collision that are meant to slow your body down in like the gentlest, slowest way possible, because all that force has to go somewhere. A lot of it's going to go into our bodies. So we want to push as much of that away off of us onto our cars as possible, and then make that collision happen very slowly. And one of the interesting things about this accident is you can see something right here. Does anybody know what that might be? There's some white stuff sticking out. I'll show you.
What is it?
It is actually styrofoam. So underneath my bumper is a whole pad of styrofoam. And my first thought as a person is, I bought a car that's filled with styrofoam. Someone basically cheated me because I bought a styrofoam car. But that's not at all what happened. The styrofoam did a super good job of absorbing the impact of the accident. And so a lot of times inside our car, my bumper was made of plastic, and our brains first say like, well, why wouldn't the car all be made of metal to keep you safe? And that's because the metal can't absorb all that force, but plastic and styrofoam can. And obviously they did that job really, really well for me. So even though it completely destroyed my bumper and destroyed my hood and several other things, it didn't destroy me. And that's the important part, because I can't be replaced, right? But my car can be replaced, and it only costs $7,000, right? So it's a pretty good deal. I'm pretty happy with it. And I will never laugh about having styrofoam in my car again, that's for sure. So now, yeah.
I have a question, although it's not really for right now. What caused people to start car crash testing?
So people were really upset about car crashes and causing fatalities, because there was a certain point where we didn't have things like seatbelts, where the glass in the windshield was not safety glass, so it just shattered and like basically went into people's faces. Really, really bad things happen when people got in car accidents. And so there was kind of a really important time in like the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, where people started campaigning more, and consumers were saying that we want safer vehicles. So there's a man called Ralph Nader who actually campaigned for vehicle safety. He wrote a book called Unsafe at Any Speed, talking about how no matter what speed the car crashes at, it's unsafe because it's not made in a way to absorb this energy. And so there was a lot of push to make safer cars. And in the last probably 20 years or so, because of these ratings, consumers or people buying cars are basically telling car manufacturers that they will not buy cars that are not safe. So there was a story of this car that had been being sold for a while, and it came out that it had a 1-star safety rating, and people just completely stopped buying it. And so they had to scrap the design. So car manufacturers understand now, because of all this long pushback, that safety isn't just something that you do because it's the right thing to do, but that consumers also will not purchase unsafe vehicles, and we're very aware of it. So it's kind of a long history of it starting, but I think it's in a really good place now where people take it super seriously. So now I'm going to get to the cool part, right? So I'm going to show you some of these advancements in safety. I'm going to stop my share for a second so I can make sure I'm sharing the sound for you. Share computer sound. Okay, here we go. So this is a video about the differences in car safety in the last 20 years. maybe.
Are you tired of clean clothes that just don't smell clean?
What if your clothes could stay fresh for weeks?
Skip. Okay.
Watching car crash tests is horrifying and mesmerizing in equal measure. Here, we're seeing the difference that 2 decades of ever-improving car design has made to safety. Europe's car safety assessment program, Euro NCAP, is 20 years old, and to mark the occasion, it staged a test. It put a Rover 100 from 1997 up against its modern city car equivalent, the Honda Jazz, and pitted both of them against a metal barrier at 40 miles an hour. Although it has seemingly modern safety features like airbags, the Rover 100 earned just 1 star out of 5. The driver dummy rattles around the inflated bag. His legs would have been crushed, he may have suffered head injuries, and the body and door of the car are so twisted it might be tough to get him out. The Honda Jazz driving dummy fares much better. Improvements in the structure of the car and tech like side curtain airbags keep him in place and protected. That car gets 5 stars. In the US, the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, or IIHS, painted a more dramatic picture of car safety evolution when it smashed a 1959 Chevrolet Bel Air into a 2009 Chevy Malibu. Both end up looking like mangled metal, but the newer car disperses the energy of the impact in a totally different way. Instead of a steering column slamming into his body, the driver of the Malibu gets cushioned and contained. Now that they're nearly out of places to stuff more airbags, engineers are focused on active safety, using tools like automatic braking to dodge crashes in the first place. Until computer-controlled, self-driving cars can actually deliver on the promise of making all crashes a thing of the past, trials like these are the best tools automotive designers have to test the machines supposed to keep us safe. And these head-to-heads show their efforts are working.
So I thought this was pretty cool, right? Because it showed that definitely cars are getting safer. And it also showed me that I probably wouldn't have gotten in an accident if I had had that braking thing, right? So if the car had braked for me. So it's pretty cool that engineers are working on all these things that can make us safer, and not only make us safer in an accident, but prevents accidents from even happening. McKenna, did you have a question?
Why do they use real cars? Because those cars can get really destroyed.
Yeah, so they use real cars because they're what's actually going to go out on the road, and there's not a good way to simulate car crashes right now. So just like with a lot of other kinds of tests, like for pharmaceuticals or ladders or anything else, we have to use the real deal to ensure that it's safe, and it's because it's such a high risk thing, right? So car accidents are really high risk for the people involved, and so we kind of spare no expense to make sure that they're safer and that the testing is done right. Okay, so going on to activities. For little kids 0 to 6, you guys can draw a car, you can draw a crash test dummy, or you can point out a safety feature that's in your car, if you have one, to your family, or in a neighbor's car or whatever. For big kids, you guys can draw a picture of a car with 3 safety features. You can make a comic about crash testing, or you can write a few sentences about the importance of crash test dummies. Okay, and then for middle schoolers, so Aiden and above, you can write a paragraph about why crash testing is important. You can draw your family car and label the safety features, or you can create a comic about crash test dummies. And then you guys know you can email your homework to me, and there's some cool resources here for you, and then I'll send you the link to this presentation as well in case you want to watch that video over again. There's a lot more out there, but I thought that one was particularly interesting because it shows how much it's changed even in the last 20 years, which isn't really that long in the history of cars, but our safety has changed a lot. Okay.